She looks like a queen. They talk about the most stunning beauties. That's just many of the rich and powerful will simply shock you with their appearance. So what did the ugliest princess look like? Who is considered the ugliest woman of all time? Which of the Russian empresses did contemporaries call the fearless gaze? And how some of the frankly ugly women went down in history as fatal beauties? Well, how do you think ugly women became famous beauties? Even in those distant times, the beauty was separated from the ugly by the mind and cosmetics. Luxurious girls who just need to wash with spring water and herbal decoction are one of the most popular images in advertising modern cosmetics. That's just how they looked already at the age of 35, and this is a 38-year-old peasant woman. The 7th place is Roxolana or Hurrem. Yes, you heard right, she's on the list of the ugliest women in history. Although technically she is not a queen, but her position at the court of Suleiman the Magnificent corresponds to the position that the queen occupied in Europe. But it's in a magnificent century. Hurrem, performed by Mariam Uzerli, is attractive. In life, the main beauty of the harem was Mahidevran. In one of the letters to Sultan Suleiman, Hurrem wrote, "I put my ugly face to your blessed feet." You say, but what about her portraits? For a long time it was believed that this portrait by Titian, painted in the 1550th, is really a portrait of a genuine Hurrem. Only this portrait was painted after Hasaka's death, and Titian had never been to the Ottoman Empire. Another artist, Melchior Loris, was also at the time when Suleiman the Magnificent ruled. He painted a portrait of Suleiman himself and his courtiers. Researchers suggest that this portrait of Roxolane, made on a tablet, may well be painted from life. And if, of course, the Sultan allowed it, because none of the outsiders, with the exception of the eunuchs, could see the concubine's face. In general, no matter how you look at it, there is simply no reliable image of Hurrem Sultan. But there is a verbal description of Suleiman's beloved wife. It was compiled by the Venetian ambassador, who personally saw her, unlike the artists. He wrote that Roxolana, as the Europeans called Hurrem, was young, but ugly. She was small in stature, about 1.5 meters. The figure swam, and the facial features were blurred, except for one big round nose. According to Ambassador Pietro Bragadini, the woman is short, with a masculine build and a long nose sticking out from under a shawl. In addition to the nose, small, deep-set eyes and thin lips caught the eye. But what struck the ambassador most was that she was a slob. There were food particles in the corners of Hurrem's mouth, and food stains on her clothes. Here is such a harsh reality. At the same time, she was an incredibly intelligent conversationalist, wrote great poems. It was with her mind that she conquered the Sultan, in the diplomat's opinion. And this is another evidence in favor of the fact that you need to be able to love yourself, your body, accept yourself as you are and get rid of complexes. To be a beauty, appearance is not important at all. In 6th place is the Duchess of Alba. Cayetana Alba is also not a queen in the literal sense of the word, but in terms of the number of titles she surpasses even Queen Elizabeth II of Great Britain. By the way, my childhood friend. There is information on the internet that Elizabeth had to curtsy to Alba, but this, of course, is a misconception, since the royal title is higher anyway. And Cayetana Alba is a famous flamenco dancer and a woman who gave up all her titles and treasures for love. Photos of this during the lifetime of the richest titled woman in Spain, the 18th Duchess of Alba, is really shocking. Although it's hard to believe, but in her youth she drove men crazy and married only for love. In her first marriage, she gave birth to 5 sons and a daughter, but this did not prevent her from becoming passionate about flamenco and learning to dance at the best in Spain. But her husband died, and she remarried to the former Jesuit priest Jesus Aguirre. She was often accused of being interested in countless plastic surgeries for the sake of her second spouse. That's just the reason for a rare disease that disfigured her face. To regain her former beauty, the Duchess of Alba went under the knife more than once. The exact number of all plastic surgeries that Alba has done is unknown. According to some reports, she changed the shape of her nose, lips, did a facelift and neck many times, injected Botox. But the surgeons could not restore her beauty, but rather disfigured her even more. But Cayetana Alba was an incredibly strong and wise woman. The loss of her former beauty did not prevent her from living a full life and not being discouraged. After the death of her second spouse, she fell in love again. In order to marry a third, who was 24 years younger than her, she gave her children her entire gigantic fortune of 3.5 billion euros. Only then did the king give his consent to her new marriage, and the spouse wrote a waiver of any claims to her property. At her wedding, the 85-year-old duchess danced flamenco. The young husband also proved that he married for love. He persuaded Cayetana, who was already moving in a wheelchair, to have an operation, and she started walking again and went with him to rest in Ibiza, where the whole world was just stunned by her bikini. Among her famous outfits is also this red wine-colored dress, as well as numerous mini ones. And that's all at 85. Cayetana has always said that she feels young and wants to dress accordingly. This incredible woman died in the 2014 year. Jeanne of France is one of the ugliest princesses and then queens in history. This is not surprising, considering that her father, King Louis XI, by the way, one of the greatest kings of France, was so ugly that his portraits were painted only in profile. His daughter, Princess Jeanne, took after her father in appearance. She was not only ugly, she also had a limp and suffered from rickets. When she was still very young, and rumors about how ugly she was did not spread through the royal houses of Europe, the king agreed that she would marry young Louis, the son of the Duke of Orleans. The king father had a brilliant insidious plan, a side Orleans branch that could claim the throne in the event of the death of his only son, so he hoped to deprive offspring. He said, "It will be a very quiet marriage. It is unlikely to be burdened with children." The wedding was played as soon as the princess turned 12, and her young groom, 14. What kind of humiliations did not poor ugly Jean have to go through? Her husband hated her, performed marital duties only under duress from her father. But with her ugly appearance, Jean was a surprisingly bright, kind person and fell in love with her husband once and for all. When the Duke of Orleans fell ill with smallpox and all his entourage fled so as not to get infected, Jean came and began to take care of him herself. But even this did not melt his heart. Instead of gratitude, her husband continued to hate her. This painful marriage for Jean lasted 20 years. Her father was succeeded on the throne by her brother, and after his death, as her father feared, the Duke of Orleans became king. So the ugliest princess briefly became the Queen of France. Not for long, because, having just ascended the throne, Louis divorced Jean, indicating several quite serious reasons: close kinship, forced marriage and infertility of Jean. Jean also suffered this humiliation from him. Her husband, who became Louis XII, quickly married her brother's widow. And Jean, the former queen, has been living away from Paris for less than a year. For the rest of her life, she helped the poor and the sick, founded the Order of Annunciates. She died very early, at the age of 40. People did not forget the unfortunate woman who had done so much good for them, and in the 18th century she was recognized as blessed, and in the 20th, canonized. The familiar image of the red-haired beauty queen in the cinema is nothing more than a delusion. No, she really was red-haired. But by the age of 30, the Virgin Queen, according to rumors of palace gossips, was practically bald and had to wear a red wig. She looked like an old woman. Her skin was ulcerated and whitened on the basis of lead, with which she abundantly tried to hide her smallpox-scarred skin. Elizabeth even ordered her servants to break all the mirrors in the palace. The poor queen couldn't see her reflections. Her terrible teeth have become a byword. The queen had to wear special pads behind her cheeks, which hid the fact that she had no teeth. Foreign ambassadors, who did not need to flatter Elizabeth, wrote that her teeth were yellow-black. Moreover, many of them have rotted to the ground. Therefore, the poor queen could not pronounce the words properly, and the courtiers had to put a lot of effort to understand what she said. According to scientists, the same lead bales and the fashion for languid pallor are to blame for everything. Fashionable makeup, which the queen was so fond of, was a slow-killing poison. Because of the desire to be beautiful and the abuse of lead, Elizabeth grew old early, lost her teeth and hair. In addition to health problems, the famous Virgin Queen, who restored England after the reign of the predecessor of Mary the Bloody, by nature had a rough voice, a large long nose and a somewhat masculine appearance. No wonder there was even a theory that Elizabeth I was actually a man. Allegedly, in childhood, the unexpectedly deceased girl was replaced with a similar boy. The girl, they say, was not at hand. The father did not notice the substitution. According to this conspiracy theory, this is where Elizabeth was forced to give a celibacy dinner, and to hide a man's Adam's apple, they say, and wore fluffy dresses with high collars. Well, you and I have moved on to the 3 ugliest rulers in history. Cleopatra, you say. How did she end up on the list of the ugliest? This is the main beauty of antiquity. And that's it. The myth of her stunning feminine charm and unusually beautiful appearance, according to one version, was started by Octavian Augustus, in order not to admit that the woman was so smart and talented, wrote off her huge influence only on appearance, that, they say, this is how she influenced a man for the whole world. But judging by the lifetime images, the ruler of Egypt was a plump woman with an expressionless face. Coins with her image from Alexandria also do not confirm the legend of her extraordinary beauty. On them, she is rather ugly. A hooked nose, a protruding chin, some masculine facial features. The bust of the queen found by archaeologists, which is considered her authentic image, shows us an oriental-type woman with a predatory cutout of the nostrils, which is also difficult to call beautiful in the classical sense. The myths of Cleopatra's beauty were finally debunked quite recently by English scientists. They found 11 of her sculptures, which were previously thought to depict other women. Historians of the British Museum have come to the conclusion that Cleopatra, at least by the end of her 38 years of life, was a rather stout, stocky woman with bad teeth, of small stature, 52 meters, with a very long nose. At the same time, Cleopatra's small stature and fullness were a tribute to her heredity, in the opinion of scientists, because she belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, most of which were not particularly beautiful. However, all this was undoubtedly compensated by remarkable intelligence and charm, which is confirmed by their famous Greek historian Plutarch. He writes that her external beauty was not at all incomparable, but she talked with irresistible charm. That's how expressionless appearance did not prevent Cleopatra from going down in history as one of the most beautiful and desirable women for men. Anna Ioannovna is the niece of Peter the Great, who was called to the Russian throne after the death of Peter II. Her reign went down in history as the Myronovskina, named after her lover Ernst-Abran, who ran everything in the empire instead of her. As the court lady Natalia Sheremetyevo described Anna Ioannovna, it was too scary to look at, she had a disgusting face. She was so great when she walks between the cavaliers, everyone is head taller, and extremely fat. However, she is suspected of bias. And here is a more diplomatic testimony of the Spanish envoy of the Duke de Liria. Empress Anna is fat and swarthy and her face is more masculine than feminine. And here is how Count Johann Ernst Minich's son describes it. Her figure was large and dark. The lack of beauty was rewarded with a noble and majestic face position. She had large brown and sharp eyes, a pockmarked face and a strong and piercing voice. Once Peter the Great married Anna to the Duke of Courland and Semigalia, Frederick III Wilhelm, but he died shortly after the wedding, as they say, because he tried to drink Peter himself. There were all sorts of rumors about the quirks of Anna Ioannovna herself. For example, she loved to listen to bedtime stories about robbers, which were told to her by talkative women gathered all over Russia. She showed not only rudeness of morals, but also cruelty. And it is not only the bureau that is to blame for all the persecutions, tortures and numerous painful executions, of which there were so many during her reign. Anyway, she is the ugliest empress in Russian history. But the ugliest woman in the history of mankind is believed to be depicted in this portrait. Perhaps you have also seen this painting by the Flemish painter Quentin Massys. It is believed that in the 1513th year he created a portrait of the Tyrolean ruler, Duchess Margarita Maltich, based on a sketch by Leonardo da Vinci himself. During her lifetime, throughout Europe, during the sermon, Margarita was publicly called the ugliest ugly, moreover, also dissolute. But how did the fate of such an ugly woman turn out? When Margarita turned 11, she was married, of course, nominally. The spouse was only 8. They lived separately. Margarita's father, the Duke of Tyrol, died when she was only 17. The good neighbors immediately attacked Tyrol, thinking that the young ruler would not be able to answer them with anything. And then, unexpectedly for everyone, the young Duchess Margarita acted as a talented ruler. She made a fiery speech, an uprising broke out, and the invaders were forced to turn tail and leave the country and recognize Margarita as the Duchess of Tyrol. The people immediately fell in love with the new ruler. Under her, the tax time weakened, trade began to flourish, cities were built. But what about the husband? They had no relationship, from the word at all. While Margarita worked hard for the benefit of Tiroli, he spent time in the company of his drinking companion's mistress. And a few years later, 23-year-old Margarita Maltash demonstrated to medieval society the wonders of emancipation, which simply shocked the 14th century. Our heroine is like this, in quotes, her husband is finally tired. She fell in love and simply wouldn't let her husband, who had returned from hunting one day, into the castle. After that, Margarita announced that this marriage was not valid, since they were not in an actual marital relationship, and began to prepare for a new wedding. For a moment, with the main handsome man of that time, Prince Ludwig of Bavaria, who, it seems, sincerely loved her. So much for the ugly one. That's where the numerous relatives of the abandoned husband came into play. They have unleashed a real information war, spreading rumors that the Duchess is ugly like no other, and in addition, she is also promiscuous. The Vatican took the side of Margarita's opponents. Both Margarita and her lover Ludwig were excommunicated from the church. So the authenticity of his feelings was confirmed, because excommunication meant that he loses the right to the crown, will not be able to take his father's throne and the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. However, this did not stop the lovers. They lived a happy family life and had 4 children. But what did Margarita do to provoke such anger from the Vatican? The fact that she demanded a divorce, citing the effectiveness of marriage. In the Middle Ages, wives had to put up with their spouses, and the official absence of marital relations, to which Margarita referred, could be explained either by the impotence of the husband, or by an irresistible disgust caused by the ugliness and promiscuity of the wife. The Pope chose the second punishment for disobedience. He declared Margarita of Tyrol both ugly and dissolute. As a result, these rumors and gossip outlived Margarita herself, and for a good 300 years after her death, people remembered that Margarita Maltash is the ugliest in the world. This memory has been preserved for centuries, and in the 18th century this portrait was prescribed to her. But it is based on a sketch by Leonardo da Vinci, which he made more than 100 years after Margarita's death. And this sketch was just a portrait of a terribly ugly old woman. It is considered a work in the grotesque style, emphasized Margarita Maltash. According to the author, the portrait had nothing to do. But a contemporary, the chronicler Johann von Winterthur, on the contrary, described Margarita Maltash as a very beautiful woman. By the way, the nickname Maltash, given to her, it should be noted, by enemies, can be interpreted as a kind of dumpling. It's not considered ugly today, is it? So, the ugliest woman in history turned out to be just a victim of intrigue and deceit. While the history of most of the women on this list eloquently testifies, you need to accept and love yourself for who you are and understand that you are beautiful and unique in any way.